Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something most people never dare to confront. What if I told you that living alone, truly alone, is better than any relationship you've ever forced yourself into? Stay with me, because by the end of this you may never look at being single same way again. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world terrified of silence, a world that rushes toward noise, distraction, and the company of others. Not always out of love, but out of fear of being alone, fear of meeting the reflection in the mirror without any O'Neills around to blur the image. But let me tell you something few will ever dare to say out loud. Solitude is not a punishment, it's not an exile, it is a power few are brave enough to hold. There comes a time in every life where you must stop and ask, who am I when no one's watching? Who am I without the relationship, the labels, the expectations placed on me by family, friends, or society? These are questions that can only be answered in solitude. When you strip away the noise, the roles you play, masks you wear, only then do you find your real self. And once you find that, you will never again be afraid of being alone. There's a quiet strength in walking into an empty home and feeling peace instead of panic. When you no longer reach for a screen, a voice, a body beside you to fill the space, but instead you listen to your own heartbeat, your breath, the thoughts that rise like waves in your mind. That's when you begin to reclaim your power. There's a kind of beauty in waking up without needing to perform for anyone, without adjusting your light to fit another person's shade. You rise on your own terms. You move according to your own rhythm, and it's not easy. Let's not pretend it is. Solitude at first can feel like a weight, it can feel like absence. You may miss the warmth of company, the comfort of conversation, but if you sit with it long enough, you begin to understand that the greatest comfort comes not from another person, but from being at peace with yourself. There is a difference between being alone and being lonely. Loneliness. Keynote 1. Solitude is power, not punishment. It's a hunger that seeks something external to fill the void. Solitude is a fullness that radiates from within. When you live alone, truly live, not just exist, you begin to discover how capable you are. You handle the silence, you manage the bills, you fix the leaky tap, take care of your health, read what you love, sleep when you want, and eat what you crave without judgment. And something miraculous begins to happen. You trust yourself. That voice inside you that was once drowned out by others' opinions grows louder. Your intuition sharpens, your confidence deepens, and you no longer second guesses your choices just because they don't match the crowds. The world often tells us we need a partner to feel complete, that without someone else we are somehow unfinished. That message has broken more spirits than we can count, but the truth, completion was never outside of you. That peace you seek in another person's arms, it already lives in your chest. You've just been too distracted to feel it. Solitude clears the clutter, it makes space for your voice, your dreams, your healing. It allows you to pour your energy into becoming, not proving. You'll notice something else when you begin to embrace solitude. Your standards rise. You're no longer desperate for company. You're no longer willing to shrink just to fit into someone else's narrow vision of love. You see the red flags early, you trust your gut, and you walk away without looking back, not because you're cold, but because you know the value of your peace. Living alone teaches you what your spirit truly needs and wants. You know that you stop trading it for fleeting moments of validation. You realize that the world outside is loud, but your inner world calm, soft, and sure that self-conversation is sacred, that your solitude is where your creativity is born, where your strength is shaped, and where your soul finally breathes without constraint. You'll find joy in your own routines, in the music you love, the books you read, the thoughts you nurture. You begin to cultivate a sanctuary within yourself, and that sanctuary is untouchable. There's a dignity in living alone that is often misunderstood. People think you're avoiding love, but it's not avoidance, it's alignment. You've chosen not to settle, you've chosen to wait for something honest, something that complements your peace rather than disturbs it. And while the world may question you, your spirit smiles, because deep down it knows you've chosen freedom, and that kind of freedom, it changes everything. Not all cages are made of iron, some are crafted from soft words, familiar routines, and the quiet resignation of compromise. There are prisons built not with bricks, but with expectations of others, and too often we mistake these bindings for love. Wettle ourselves. It's normal to shrink, to bend, to contort our very essence just to keep the peace, just to make it work. But deep down something aches, something whispers that love shouldn't feel like a burden you carry on. You're back while calling it a blessing. Living alone teaches you the value of your own freedom, not just physical freedom, but freedom of thought, of feeling, of space, the kind of freedom where you don't have to explain why you need silence today, why your mood is different, why you want to spend time in stillness. You don't need to justify your preferences, your pace, your dreams. You live without tiptoeing around another person's emotional landmines. You speak freely, breathe deeply, and move without constant background fear of being misunderstood in relationships. We are often taught that compromise is the glue that holds it all together. But what they rarely tell you is that constant compromise erodes the self. Not all compromises are noble. Some slowly chip away at who you are until one day you'll look in the mirror and don't recognize the person staring back. You agreed to change a little. Hear silence, a part of yourself there. Delay your goals just a while longer, and peace by peace you became a version of yourself designed for someone else's comfort, not your own growth. The tragedy isn't just in the keynote to freedom over compromise, a loss of time. It's in the quiet surrender of your essence when you start choosing peace over truth, when you swallow your voice to keep the room calm, when your dreams become background noise, tossing me and else's insecurities. That's when you begin to disappear. You smile. Beauty, it's not your smile. You laugh. It doesn't reach your soul. You're present, but your spirit is elsewhere, curled up in a corner, waiting for you to come back home. Living alone removes the need for such bargains. You no longer barter your peace for fleeting companionship. You don't wake up anxious about someone else's mood. You don't modify your day to cater to emotional volatility. You don't edit your personality depending on who you're with. You are simply and fully yourself, and that kind of wholeness is rare, and it is sacred. There is a clarity that comes with solitude, a clarity that's often clouded in relationships, where you're constantly negotiating who gets to take up more space. And let's be honest, many relationships are battlegrounds of dominance disguised as affection. What gets the final say? Who sacrifices more? Who loves better? Who needs less? These power plays wear you down. They turn love into competition, intimacy into strategy. After a while, you start confusing attachment with affection. Control with care. Freedom is not about defiance, it's about dignity. When you live alone, you're not rebelling against love. You're reclaiming your right to live without submission. You're choosing not to exist as half of something broken, but as a whole human being. You're not saying never love. You're saying, I will not trade my soul for temporary companionship. That is not bitterness, that is wisdom. There is a certain sharpness that life gifts you when you've been through enough broken promises and fake apologies. You start recognizing what matters, and what matters most is peace, the kind that doesn't fluctuate with someone else's moods, the kind that doesn't vanish after an argument, the kind that lives quietly inside you, unmoved and unwavering. And that peace often comes when you stop chasing someone else's definition of happiness and start building your own. People will say you're being too guarded, too selective, too self-sufficient. But what they don't understand is that freedom has taught you value your own. You're not hard to love. You just refusato be loved poorly, and that to many feels like rebellion, but it's no rebellion. It's revelation. You've seen what happens when you give too much and receive too little. You felt theoid of pretending. You've tasted the emptiness of connections that only fill your time, not your heart. So when you choose to live alone, you're not giving up on connection. You're clearing space for the right kind. You're no longer willing to give up freedom for the illusion of closeness. You're no longer willing to dim your light for someone who can't handle the brightness of your truth. You've learned that being alone with your soul intact is far better than being with someone while constantizing pieces of yourself. And in that choice, you reclaim your life, not just your days, but your spirit. You walk through your door not to escape, but to return to the one person who has always been there, waiting to be seen, heard, and honored yourself. And in doing so, you choose the rarest kind of love, one rooted in freedom, authenticity, and peace. There is a kind of silence that speaks louder than words. It doesn't beg for attention, doesn't demand validation. It simply is present, steady, and alive. Most people fear it. They fill every gap with sound, with movement, with someone. But if you ever sit in that silence long enough, you'll discover it holds more truth than 1,000 conversations. The absence of noise becomes a mirror. It shows you where you're wounded, where you're whole, and what you've been hiding from your entire life. Living alone gifts you this silence, the kind that heals, the kind that doesn't come with conditions. You wake up, and there's No need to perform. No one is waiting for a version of you they've created in their mind. No one is asking what's wrong or are you okay, because the silence has already answered. Keynote 3. The healing silence site. You are not navigating someone else's moods before you've had a chance to feel your own. You're not walking on eggshells to preserve someone else's comfort. You simply are. And that is enough. A quiet time is not empty. It is sacred. There is no arguing behind closed doors, no tension bleeding into the walls, no invisible war being fought in the air. What there is, what remains is peace, and when peace becomes the baseline. When you begin to breathe without anticipation of conflict or correction, you start to realize how much of your life has been spent in survival mode, how often you adjusted yourself to maintain false harmony, how often you said, it's okay, when it wasn't. In solitude, you begin to feel your own presence, and there is power in that. You eat your meals without distraction. You hear the tick of that clock. You notice the light as it moves across the floor in the afternoon. You read without interruption. You sit with your thoughts, and for once, you're not trying to escape them. You listen to music not to drown your sadness, but to accompany your stillness. You begin to appreciate the richness of ordinary things, the warmth of your tea, the softness of your bed, the slow, quiet, often evening spent without expectation. And this is where healing begins, not in distraction, but in stillness. When you stop running from the quiet, you start hearing the parts of yourself that have been whispering for years. The parts that were silenced to keep a relationship intact, the parts that never got to speak because someone else's voice was always louder. Now their eyes, now they speak clearly, now they're heard when there's no one else around. There's nothing left to perform. The masks come off. And that moment, that sacred moment, is when you begin to return to yourself. You feel what's real. You feel what's unfinished. You feel what needs to be forgiven, not just in others, but in yourself, because solitude is not peaceful. It's revealing. It doesn't just make space. It shows you what you've been filling your life with, and whether it was ever truly serving you. Some people mistake this silence for sadness. They assume you must be lonely, must be missing someone, but that's the perspective of those who have never allowed themselves to be fully present in their own company. Because once you sit with silence long enough, it stops feeling like absence. It begins to feel like presence, your own. And what a thing it is to befriend yourself after you're signaling your own voice for the sake of keeping someone else close. There are no fights to replay, no what-ifs to obsess over, no passive-aggressive glances across the table, no guilt, no obligation, no silent expectations. Just quiet, and in that quiet clarity, you see who you've become, you see what you've allowed, and you begin to rebuild, not out of desperation, but out of awareness. You choose your thoughts, you choose your rhythms, you choose your peace again and again each day. You begin to love your own company, not because it's all you have, but because it's become all you need. And that is not a loss, that is a rebirth. You stop craving someone else to complete the picture, because the portrait of your life as it is still and whole is enough. That doesn't mean you've closed your heart. It means your heart has found a home in stillness, and any presence that comes next must bring calm, not chaos. Living in a quiet space doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means everything is happening internally. The transformation, the realignment, the remembering of who you were before the world told you who to be. And from this place, every decision you make is no longer rooted in fear or scarcity. You're no longer choosing to be with someone just to avoid being alone, because now you know this silence, this stillness, this sacred solitude is not your enemy. It is your sanctuary. Most people don't stay in relationships because they're in love. They stay because they're afraid of the silence that follows a breakup, afraid of starting over, afraid of being alone with their own thoughts. So they cling to what's familiar, even if it's draining the life out of them. They decorate the cracks with forced smiles. Keynote 4. Relationships aren't always love. Wear matching clothes to disguise the emotional distance and call it love, but truth, it's not love that keeps them there. It's fear wrapped in the costume of commitment. There's a kind of relationship where you stop growing the moment it begins, where love is conditional. Affection is a tool for control, and communication is a battlefield where every conversation feels like a negotiation. Every disagreement turns into a quiet war, and every mistake you make is recorded and replayed in future arguments, and you learn to adapt, to shrink, to keep the peace at the expense of your own spirit. You tell yourself this is normal. You tell yourself all relationships are hard. You Begin to believe the problem is you, but it's not you, it's the fear you've inherited, the belief that solitude is punishment. And being chosen by anyone is a victory. We were taught to value being wanted more than being respected. So we settle, we compromise our inner truth for outer appearances, we swallow our needs, delay our healing, and suppress our voice just to avoid that aching emptiness we think will come if we walk away, yet the emptiness isn't the enemy, it's the beginning of truth, the first quiet space where you finally meet yourself. You didn't have to twist yourself into a smaller version of who you are just to keep someone close. You don't have to tolerate disrespect because you fear being alone. That fear isn't your guide, it's your prison. And once you recognize that, you begin to feel the bars loosen. It all love is love. Some of it is possession, some of it is fear in disguise, some of it is routine attendance guilt. You stay not because the heart is full, but because the unknown seems too vast, because they've become a habit, and leaving feels like breaking something in your bones, but habits aren't homes, and fear isn't a foundation. You don't build a future on a structure that trembles every time you speak your truth. There are people living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, eating at the same table, who haven't really seen each other in years. They pass each other like shadows, both pretending everything's fine. They share photos online, they go out with friends, but they're strangers in private. The spark is gone, the connection is shallow, and yet they stay, not out of love, but because leaving would require courage they haven't found yet. It takes immense strength to walk away from something that looks stable but feels empty, to say, this isn't enough, when everyone around you says, at least you have someone. But companionship isn't the same as connection, and being with someone physically doesn't mean you're with them emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Loneliness in a relationship can feel even colder than solitude in a quiet room, because at least when you're alone you are honest about it. When you live alone, you don't have to pretend, you don't have to explain why you're quiet today, why you're emotional, why you need space. You're not constantly navigating someone else's expectations. You're not editing your thoughts before you speak. You're not performing a role every day of your life just to keep the illusion going. You're present, you're real, you're whole, and that for many feels unfamiliar because they've spent years being half off something instead of whole on their own. Some relationships teach you what love is not. They show you the danger of giving too much without receiving the same. They show you how easily affection can be used as a tool for manipulation. They remind you how important it is to protect your peace, to honor your voice, to guard your energy. And once you've seen that, once you've felt the weight of forced love, of emotional imbalance, of spiritual suffocation, you start to crave something different, something quieter, something more aligned. Living alone removes the need to justify your worth. You no longer seek validation from another person's attention. You no longer measure your value by how someone else treats you look inward, you see yourself clearly, you begin to rebuild that inner foundation that was cracked by years of imbalance, and what grows in its place is not bitterness, it's clarity. You learn that love doesn't have to hurt, that connection doesn't require sacrifice of self, that peace is a birthright, not a luxury. And so you stop. Keynote 5. You are not chasing relationships for the sake of being seen. You stop settling just because someone shows interest. You begin to wait, not in desperation, but in strength, because you know what it means to carry yourself. You know what it means to face silence and not be afraid. You know what it feels like to come home to your own soul and find that it is not a lonely place but a sanctuary. There comes a moment in life when you stop searching for yourself in someone else's eyes. You stop trying to feel alive through someone else's heartbeat, and that moment, thou quiet and unannounced, is the beginning of everything. It's where the healing begins. Because up until that point, you may have thought that being loved meant being chosen, that to be validated meant someone needed to see how want you, need you. But the truth is far simpler and far more profound. Your worth isn't a reflection of someone else's attention. Your value is not measured in who stays or who leaves. It is carved into your existence. It was always there, waiting to be seen by the only one who matters. You living alone peels away the illusion that you need someone else to feel whole. It takes away the applause, the compliments, the warm hands holding yours, and it leaves you with just you. At first, that might feel like a void, a silence too loud, but over time that space becomes sacred. You begin to feel your own presence. You start to hear your own voice, unfiltered, undiluted, uninterrupted, and for the first time perhaps in years you start to believe it. You learn to cook for yourself not because someone's watching, not for praise or company, but because you deserve nourishment. You learn to dress for yourself, to feel good in your own skin without needing a second opinion. You walk into your home and you're greeted by your energy, your choices, your scent in the air. There's no need to ask for permission, no need to apologize for how you are, no effort to fit someone's mold. You are not performing anymore, you are simply buying you. Don't need a witness to your life to make it meaningful. You don't need a partner's love to prove you're lovable. You don't need to be chosen to matter. These are truths that take time to absorb, especially when the world around you constantly whispers the opposite. But when you live alone, you start proving them to yourself in the quiet. In the daily rhythms that belong only to you, your solitude becomes your teacher, your healer, your mirror. It reflects who you truly are beyond titles and roles, beyond relationships and responsibilities. And what you find is that there is beauty in enough, not because someone told you so, not because you've achieved something grand, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself. You begin to realize how often in relationships you outwisted your truth to keep someone comfortable, how often you softened your needs to be seen as easy to love, and you start to feel the weight of all the apologies you made for simply being human, all the guilt you carried for wanting space, honesty, peace. When you're alone, no one interrupts your healing, no one rewrites your story while you're trying to remember who you are. You are free to face the pain you've buried under performance. You confront the moments where you gave too much, stayed too long, ignored the red flags, betrayed your own intuition, and instead of shame, what rises is compassion, not from another person but from within. You begin to forgive yourself, not because someone else told you to move on, but because you now understand that your survival depended on it. There's strength in that, not the kind that shouts or postures, but the quiet, unwavering kind, the strength that comes from knowing you are enough as you are, without the hand-holding, with the romantic approval, without the borrowed confidence of someone else's affection. You walk lighter, not because life is easier, but because you are no longer carrying the heavy need tog, understood by everyone. You are no longer molding yourself into what others want to see you fall in love again. But this time with yourself, with your mornings, with your breath, with the way you keep showing up, even when sclapping. You find joy in your own laughter, comfort in your own silence. You stop waiting for someone to make you feel special, because you've realized that you already are, not because you're flawless, but because you've made peace with your flaws. You've made peace with parts of you that used to chase, used to cling, used to question if love meant losing yourself. Living alone doesn't mean you've given up on love. It means you've stopped outsourcing your joy. It means your heart is no longer for sale to the lowest bidder. It means you've drawn a line, not around others, but around yourself, to protect the peace you fought so long to reclaim. It means that any love that comes now must meet you where you are, not where you used to hide, because once you've sat with yourself long enough, once you've held your own hand through. Keynote 6. Loneliness is a mirroreth dark, and wiped your own tears in silence. You realize this is not loneliness, this is liberation, and no relationship, no matter how romantic or familiar, is worth sacrificing your return to yourself. There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't beg to be filled. It doesn't scream for company or chase distractions. It sits beside you like an old friend, silent but steady, and it teaches you something most people never learn in a lifetime, that being alone and being lonely are not the same. One is a lack of presence, the other is a presenceso. Deep, so honest, it becomes its own kind of company. When you first begin to live alone, that quiet can feel overwhelming. You start noticing things you once drowned in noise, the echo of your own thoughts, the memories that surface uninvited, the regrets you buried beneath the constant noise of conversation. Solitude strips away the external, it removes the busy schedule, the social noise, the artificial laughter shared over coffee. When you're hurting inside, what you're left with is the raw material of your soul, and for the first time, you're forced to confront it. This is where most people turn back. They panic. They run to someone, anyone, to escape the reflection that solitude forces upon them. But those who stay, those who choose to face it, begin to uncover a quiet strength. They realize the silence was never empty. It was full of everything they ignored. Every unhealed moment, every abandoned dream, every part of themselves they handed over in the name of love or validation or fear, and instead of drowning they learn to breathe underwater. You start to see your loneliness not as a curse but as a mirror. It reflects back the truth of your life. It shows you where you've depended too much, where you've lost out. With your essence, you begin to ask deeper questions. Who am I when I'm not needed by anyone? What do I want when no one else is watching? What parts of me are real and what parts were shaped just to be accepted? These are not easy questions. They will not be answered in a day, but in solitude. You're finally given the space to ask them. There's something profoundly honest about being alone with yourself. No one to perform for, no role to play. You discover which of your beliefs are truly yours and which were planted there by someone else. You unlearn the need to prove, to please, to chase. You stop measuring your worth by how often your phone lights up or how loved you feel in someone's presence, because love becomes something internal, something quiet, something no longer dependent on being seen. The great irony is this: the more comfortable you become with your own company, the more free you are in the world. You no longer fear rejection because you've accepted yourself. You no longer settle for fragments of affection because you've tasted the fullness of your own presence. You walk into rooms not seeking attention but carrying peace. You listen more because you no longer need to be heard to feel important. You give without needing anything in return, because your cup is not empty, it is full because you filled it yourself. This kind of solitude is rare, and it is often misunderstood. People think you've become distant, too independent, unwilling to connect. But that's not it at all. You've simply learned that connection should never cost you your center. You've realized that silence isn't something to run from, it's something to lean into, because it's there in that quiet space that your intuition speaks, that your heart recalibrates, that your past stops haunting and starts teaching. You begin to see the world differently. You no longer envy loud love stories or compare your journey to others. You recognize that most of what people display is performance, that true contentment rarely needs to be announced. You stop looking for someone to walk beside you just to feel less alone. If someone comes, they closing reflections and call to self-respect him, but you've already made peace with walking alone because the path you're on no longer frightens you. You trust it now. You trust you now. To arrive at that place, you must be willing to be untied first, to let go of what was never yours, to sit with the ache and let it speak talkery when needed, to laugh unexpectedly, to forgive yourself not in theory but in quiet of a room where no one else is listening. You must learn to sit with your darkness and not panic, to find your own light not in someone else's eyes but in the stillness of your own gaze. Fueled will always try to convince you that you're missing something, that happiness is a person, a place, a future. But when you live alone long enough, when you truly allow yourself to live, not just exist in solitude, you learn a deeper truth, that nothing is missing, that everything you were looking for was never out there. It was waiting for you to stop running. It was waiting in the silence. It was waiting in the mirror. It was waiting in you. Lonjan, don't fear solitude. Fear losing yourself in someone who doesn't see you. Fear waking up decades later, wondering where your joy went. Fear becoming a stranger to your own soul just to be loved by another, because the greatest relationship you will ever have is with yourself. And Anseo master that you'll never settle for less again. Choose peace over presence, over shouting, freedom over forced love. Because sometimes being alone is the only way to truly be alive.